Hey there, sorry about that. There was neighbors just randomly showed up. My greenhouse here is right by the driveway, so it would have been a little hard to hear. But anyways, I was talking about these bigger bins, these rotating compost bins. You may have seen them, and I'll post a link for those too below. Don't worry, this isn't it's not an affiliate link. I'm not affiliated. It's just to give you guys ideas. But you can get these bins, these rotating bins, that every few days, you put them out in the sun, and between the heat and rotating them, you could break down just about anything into soil in, a few days. Now, the nice thing about having them up on a stand, and up closer, if you have any kind of back problems maybe, or shoulder issues, bending over to scoop stuff out, or turning a compost pile is something that's really difficult for you, or maybe you have some sort of disability, this is going to be something that might be worth the investment for you, because you're standing up to put your stuff in, because it's got a little door in the side. When it's ready, you just pull your wheelbarrow up and you kind of scoop your stuff out and add the next thing. Now, I'm going to say too, if you're using things like rotating compost bins, because they're not on the soil, it's a bit of a different process. They should come to get you started with a pack of enzyme material to add to your first bin full of stuff that you're putting in, just because you need the bacterial action, and so you get that going. When you are done with that first round of composting, be sure to save a couple of shovelfuls of stuff in a bucket or something off to the side, and then when you start the next one, add that in there, and you can just continue on propagating those enzymes and bacteria, whatever it is that's in the soil, rather than having to go out and buy a pack of stuff every time, right? So just keep that in mind. Now, what to use for compost bucket? Here we come to aesthetics, and maybe you have things all color match in your house, and you're very particular how it looks. You can find things to go with that, with a lid on top. Basically, it's something that's going to be just big enough for you when you're cooking a meal to put all your scraps in, and when you're finished, it would go out to the compost bin. This isn't usually something that you leave sitting for for any length of time, because it will start to break down. It will get a sour smell, and you don't want that. And especially in the summer, if you have fruit and stuff in there, you're going to have problems with fruit flies. The thing with compost buckets in the house is that they get emptied out multiple times a day, given a quick wash with soapy water, and then add to it at the next meal or whatever cooking you're doing. Don't leave them sitting in the house for unwashed, because it's going to smell, and again, fruit flies and stuff, it's just not attractive. Now, if maybe you're not worrying about having a color matched little ceramic thing that has a lid on it and whatever, which is fine if that's what you want. But literally, we have like I think it's an ice cream bucket with the lid, which works just fine. It's like a 1 gallon size, which is enough for if you're making a pot of soup, and then the stuff goes out, and it's easy to keep up on. You don't have to go for anything fancy. Chances are you probably have something similar sitting in your cupboard, and it will be just fine. Now, the do's and don'ts of composting. There are a few do's and there's a few don'ts, and if you keep these in mind, you're not going to have a bunch of smell. I've had people say, "Oh, compost piles can really stink." If you're adding the wrong things to them, yes, that can happen. If you're not, it should just smell like soil. Like when you go out in a forest, and the smell of the breaking down leaves, there's kind of that earthy smell. It's pretty much what your compost pile should smell like. And if you're putting in all the right things, you're not going to have a problem. Now, let's see here. When you're starting your compost pile on the ground, add in some leaves and branches and, grass clippings and stuff, kind of mix it up, add in some food scraps, but really make sure and mix it up, because things like grass clippings get very dense as they break down, and they can really compact, and so they can start smelling really sour, which is why they're what you would call a green manure. And they add a lot of nitrogen, which is really important for your soil later on as it breaks down. But they can become compact, which is why you don't want to add a whole bunch of, like if you're doing a massive yard, don't just go and stack it in there a foot deep, because it will just get slimy and kind of sour. It will just get kind of slimy and sour smelling, right? Which you don't want, especially if neighbors close by, or maybe you use your yard a lot, right? So mix it up with other things. But beyond that, I mean, my compost bin in the fall, I mean, I layer in all the leaves from I've got 13 fruit trees, right? 9 of them apple. Like, we have a lot of leaves, and they get piled in there. They're mostly dry, and with the fall and winter rains, I mean, it packs down, and I mean, keeps getting mixed in with food scraps and stuff. And that's fine, if you're not using your leaves for mulching. But mix it up. I mean, straw is good. If you have chickens, add in the manure and it'll all break down. In the spring, turn it over so that the stuff that's not breaking down on side is turned into the center, and the inside stuff adds bacteria to the outer edges that are being mixed in, and it'll break down much more evenly. You can add in, here's a list of some of the things that you can add in. You can add in your coffee grounds and tea bags. Okay, I do this all the time. I read something about tea bags they break down just fine. The earthworms love them. Okay, your cardboard milk and juice boxes. I take, especially if they're smaller ones and they're not ones. Let me see here what I've got below. These things, cardboard. Rip them up so they're kind of in smaller pieces, and the water and bacteria get to them better. But your earthworms will break them down just fine. They love shredded newspaper and cardboard. And I'm not talking and putting it through the shredder. I mean, if that's what you have, that's great. But I'm talking just taking and kind of ripping it up so that it mixes in better and easier with your compost. That's about it. It doesn't have to be complicated. If you have wood ashes, from a fireplace, provided you haven't been burning scraps, like plastics and stuff, and some people do that, just make sure that it's like wood, and, whatever it is you might be getting rid of in there is organic and good for your garden. Which is very good for your soil. If you have the option of adding in algae or seaweed, it is an excellent nutrients. There's so many trace elements and nutrients that would be good for your soil pretty much anywhere. There's rinse them off, I guess. Rinse off the seaweed, I guess, if you have fresh stuff from the ocean. And I'm going to say, if you live near the ocean and you have the option to go get seaweed, go after a storm. Don't go out pulling up stuff that's already living. Go after a storm and get the stuff that's washed up by the shore, that's already broken off. Okay, don't go taking stuff that's already growing out there. It's like anything else. It's like any other kind of wild forage. You don't want to take much of the living stuff, and you get too many people doing that, we're going to start affecting, the seaweed forests out there, and you don't want to do that either. But going after a storm and collecting a bin or two for mulching down your garden or your greenhouse, or putting in your compost pile, is an excellent thing to do if you have that option. If you don't, I mean, you can add in, do a mix of fish fertilizer, and you can water your compost pile down to get that action going, and the bacteria and nutrients that the worms and everything will turn into it will make it really, really good for your garden as well. Now, straw is good. Hay, you can add in hay and weeds, you can. However, it will be a longer process composting them because of all the weed seeds. All right, and you want to make sure and give it that time. I'm going to say at least a year of having been turned or in a black bin, because some of those seeds are really, really resilient. And if you don't have them broken down properly, they will grow in your garden. And it can be not fun trying to do that much weeding. Granted, if you're mulching, which is another topic altogether, it will greatly reduce that. Now, one more thing. Well, I'll get to that here in a minute. The don'ts of composting, and there's just a few of them. You don't add in meat or dairy products. Okay, so you don't go throwing in like cheeses, meat and fat scraps. They don't break down the same. They take a lot longer. They will stink as they deteriorate, and it will attract in other things. Okay, and you're talking anything from wild animals, if they have access to your property, stray dogs, to even things like rats and mice. Okay, which you don't want. Okay, and I think that's probably why, maybe in more urban places they've banned composting altogether, because if you don't know how to do it properly, it can cause a problem. Don't do that. Your meat and compost scraps, your bones and whatever, if you don't have a way of, maybe adding them to a fire pit and then to your garden, send those out in your trash, which is, what it's for. Do not ever add cat, dog, or human feces. There's ways now, there's more information, and there's places that are actually taking and breaking it down. But it is a much longer process, because there's a lot of diseases that cats and dogs have that are very similar, and that humans have. And if you do not have high heat and or a long-term compost, we're talking, I think it's like 2 years, you can pass those diseases on either to yourself and your family or to other people by putting them in your soil, and your vegetables do have them. And this is where it's really interesting. I don't know if you've maybe your grandparents or older people that you've met, they like to have their vegetables and stuff that they and their meat like really well cooked or boiled. Like they're well cooked. Okay, whereas we kind of like our stuff crunchy, a little bit, has a bit of texture to it yet. And I don't know if you've maybe met anyone from, second war, baby boomers type thing. And there's a reason for this, because back then, my grandfather was the same way. Back, in the 40s and 50s and 60s, I mean, composting was a big thing. And or way back before then even. But the thing is, there were certain diseases and stuff and that were being added to the soil that people will get. So one that comes to mind is trichinosis, which is a parasite that comes from hog manure, raising pigs. And if it's not composted down long enough, this would go into the compost piles. The compost piles were fresh. They just get added onto the garden in the spring. And though that illness, those parasites would be present in your vegetables and even other meat from consuming, these vegetables. And they figured out that it was because it was being passed on. They hadn't quite figured out the whole composting, the ins and outs of what was best practices for composting. And so people were getting trichinosis and whatever, but they did discover that if you took and you thoroughly boiled your vegetables and your meat was cooked well done, that these were killed. And so this is why, because, there wasn't cures for a lot of these things back then, or if it was really difficult. And so everybody just learned that your vegetables and your meat and everything was really well cooked, and you didn't get these things. And they've never been able to get past that, because it was a really big thing back in the day. That's why. Now, of course, we have a lot more knowledge about composting and that sort of thing. So, adding in the two that you probably want to do the most research on and, go for long-term composting is cow manure and your pig. Because there's parasites or things like E. coli that you need to have long-term and preferably heat involved, but at least long-term, like I say, I think it's about 2 years. So, if you need some cow manure or whatever, just, I grab a few bags in the spring and add it to my soil, because the stuff you get at the store has already been heat treated and everything else, and it's safe and ready to use. But other things that you can add in, like sheep and goat, horse manure, chicken manure, you can add all those to your compost heap if you have it. Just make sure it breaks down on the regular thing and it's fine to use. The other thing with chicken manure, if maybe you have some backyard chickens, is that it is really, really high in ammonia, which is why chicken manure stinks so much. And it will burn your plants if it's not broken down properly. It has to be broken down to the point where it just smells like really rich, fresh soil out in the forest. Before that, no, it's amazing for your plants, but if you put it on too soon and that isn't broken down enough, it will burn your plants. You can actually kill all your plants and seedlings if you put fresh chicken manure out. So, don't be doing that. Make sure that your compost has enough time. Now, the other, I already mentioned this earlier. The other don't is, don't add in a great big stack of green stuff all at once. Break it up with leaves and branches, maybe some straw. So you're talking grass clippings, weeds, that sort of thing. If you have that green, fresh stuff really, really stacked deeper, like I say, it's going to smell, it's going to go sour, it's not going to break down properly. It will eventually, but you just don't want that complication. It should just be mixed in with other things, okay? And something else, okay, with your meat and fat scraps and everything, something you can do. Okay, and this is also really good for your soil. If you have fish scraps, okay, it doesn't matter whether you go fishing and it's fish guts and fish heads. Now, you do have to be careful of it smelling. You want to bury it deep, either in your compost bin or out in your garden. But the addition of this to your soil, your earthworm population is going to explode, and you're going to grow amazing, amazing fruits and vegetables, okay? But you do want to make sure that it's buried at least like a foot or two down, so that there's no smell, there's no issues with it coming back, or making sure that it's buried well deep in the bottom of that compost pile so that your earthworms can take care of it quickly and you're not attracting anything. But if you can do that, amazing, amazing results for your garden. And that's about it. Basically make sure that you don't have too big of a stack of any sorts of one type of thing, especially your green stuff. Don't go adding in meats or dairy like cheese and, boiled eggs, that sort of thing. You can add eggshells and you don't have to bake them first. You don't have to rinse them out. Just throw them out there. Nature will take care of the rest. You can add compost, compost your coffee grounds and tea bags. You can add in shredded newspaper and cardboard, to recycle these things rather than sending them off. You can improve your soil. Don't add in your poop scraps from your pets or from humans. And the last thing is, if it's hot and dry especially, make sure that it stays damp. Maybe give it a watering every so often. Make sure that the moisture is there for that bacteria action. That's really it. It's really, I hope that helps. There's so much that we have handy that can improve our soil in our gardens. And, I can't wait to get gardening here. We still have like a foot and a half of snow melting out here. I'm not sure where it is where you are, but I would love to hear from you. And you know what? Happy gardening. Go put on some big sun hat and some lipstick if you're where you can do that. And I look forward to hearing from you. Bye for now.